Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Moon Knight, starring Oscar Isaac, May Kalamawi, Khalid Abdallah, and Arkanjuran, forgive me if I said that wrong, Antonia Salib, Kareem El Hakam, Sophia Danu, Saba Murbarak, I don't know if I said that right, please forgive me, F. Murray Abraham, and Ethan Hawke, directed by Mohammed Diab, Justin Benson, and Aaron Moorhead. Now, the reason I'm putting this before Doctor Strange is because this came out a couple days, the final episode per se, came out a couple days before Doctor Strange ever came out. So I'm putting this every single time before Doctor Strange. We'll see how this goes. And yeah, let's get into it. Stephen Grant, played by Oscar Isaac, has a job at a museum gift shop in London. While at home, he sleeps with his feet tied up. For what reason? As I don't think this is the safest thing to do. And for a superhero, well, he is an outcast in life, and his boss, Donna, as well as other people, treat him like they don't know him at all, while a girl he crushes on asks him out for steak, as he's a vegetarian. And what is he doing in a steakhouse is really questionable, as he's a vegetarian, but this, in my opinion, is pretty weird for a superhero show. He talks with a man pretending to be a statue, as this feels pretentious, as he puts sand on the ground and so he can track his footsteps. And my problem is I don't get what's happening from his life, as I don't really care for the character versus a dream he has where somebody else has, he hears a voice of Khonshu, voiced by F. Mary Abraham, as he takes over his own body while he begs for Mark Spector, also played by Oscar Isaac, to take over as he runs around and meets the show's villain, Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, in a terrible performance, by the way. And he looks like he can play a villain in an upcoming movie called The Black Phone better than he can here, where he wears a mask, whereas here, his face isn't as evil as it looks in that upcoming movie. And these characters are not relatable, as any of the Marvel shows and movies, with an exception of Hawkeye, Eternals, and Inhumans, Stephen tries to give Arthur a golden snitch looking thing, as Khonshu forces him to not. And again, I'm just reading my notes. Khonshu forces him to give it away, to not give it away, excuse me, and as he escapes in a cupcake truck, a chase occurs in the middle of the highway as Arthur's men try to kill him, and by him I mean Stephen, or believing he's someone else, and Wake Me Up playing in the background was kind of dumb, while he kills the bad guys off screen, which is again pretty dumb, as this entire sequence is friggin' dumb. Stephen wakes up and tries to explain how his fish has two fins, as he thought it had one, and he goes on his date with the woman who he was going to have steak with, as he's 2 days late, as he's been asleep for 2 days, and has steak all by himself, and comes home with some chocolates and learns he has a secret under his carpet. And the character Oscar Isaac is playing is very pathetic, and unfortunately I don't like his character. Stephen finds a phone and calls Layla El Fowley, I think I said that right, played by May Kalamawi, and finds out he has a possible parasite named Mark Spector, also that I already brought up was also played by Oscar Isaac, and his head in his apartment is scaring him, as Stephen runs out of the elevator, to the elevator, I mean, and an elderly woman comes in, and now he is on the bus, which is really random as he gets off the bus, and this show is getting weirder and weirder by episode 1. I'm still on episode 1, by the way. Stephen gets to the museum and sees Arthur and his minions are there, and explains the Egyptian queen who was evil, whom I can't remember the name of. Maybe the show will explain later on, and he continues to work at the museum. And could you be working if something serious was happening? Because I wouldn't, as this is getting tedious and weird. Stephen hears things at nighttime as Arthur asks him to give the scarret which is the golden snitch thing I brought up earlier in the episode, as Steven goes into the bathroom and bumps into Mark as he lets Mark take over his body and becomes a superhero, the Moon Knight. And the costume design is good, but this episode ended with me thinking, this is a weird show. And would I come back to this if it weren't for a miniseries and I had to review for Marvel? Probably not, but I did, so let's see how the next 5 episodes go. But so far, this is way too freaking weird. Steven wakes up on his bed while his feet are tied up, and next thing you know, he goes to the museum and sees the cameras and the security guard as he sees he's the one who broke the museum the night before, as Steven believes he needs a doctor, as he talks with the statue once again and hugs him as he gives himself some good advice as he goes to a room to get some things as Mark Spector and sees his property, including the Scarret, and Mark appears and says he can save him and explains who he is as Steven decides to turn himself into the authorities. And this is still a weird show, as I'm thinking I don't like this as I've seen this before. Like, he's two different people, as it's confusing and distracting. I'll talk about why later, but like in the other movies I've seen, like there was a movie with Jet Li where there was like 2 of them, and there was a movie with Schwarzenegger where there was 2 of them. There's so many movies that have 2 people as 2 different being played by the same actor, and it's still very distracting. I'm not a fan of that in general. Steven bumps into Layla as she gives him a ride on her scooter, and she takes him to his apartment as they talk, and C. Mark is in his mind like a parasite while Steven and Layla are talking, and she tries to divorce Mark as we learn he got fired from the museum by dialogue, which is a pointless moment of the show because that was already told. The authorities burst into Steven's apartment while they think he stole something and knows about his fake identity. And the authorities take Steven while believing he's Mark Spector, and they take him to Arthur, who happens to be their boss. And at this point, I'm confused as hell. While Khonshu is another parasite in Steven's imagination, while it's confusing the holy crap out of me. We learned Arthur was Khonshu's avatar, as he used to be the Moon Knight, while he talks with Steven, and his minions come close to them as Mark wants to take over the body, while Arthur wants to reason with Mark while getting the Scarret and to give it to his boss, Amit. As Steven doesn't have it, Layla comes in with the Scarret and they run out and escape, and as Arthur calls out Amit, the effects of when Arthur makes a monster come out, it looked absolutely terrible, and I can't believe how bad the writing of this dialogue is. Steven gets pushed out while he hides with Layla, and he gets pushed out and puts on the suit, and suddenly he fights the invisible monster, as nobody except Steven can see the monster, and Mark does eventually take over the body to finish the monster off, and the fight sequence is way too silly, in a terrible way. Mark talks with Steven, and Steven wants to get his body back, and Mark tries to deal with Steven, but he can't, and Khonshu tells Mark Steven is his avatar, and is this making sense? Not at all. And Mark is in Cairo, Egypt, and then the episode ends here as it was confusing half to death. We start the next episode with Layla getting an identity card as well as a new identity and getting her picture taken, and this opener was ludicrous to me. Arthur gets info of Mark being in Cairo after they find a place where they can find Amit to release her while Mark fights some muggers, and Steven wakes up and tries to talk with one of the muggers and gets knocked out, and all of this is confusing as he wakes up and asks a mugger where Arthur is at, but he gets himself killed while Mark interrogates him, and Khonshu sends a signal to Arthur, and he keeps digging, and Mark goes inside a Great Pyramid to speak with the avatars that are councils, let's say. And Arthur is there as he tells the council is the bad guy, as he is the bad guy, I would say, as he knows he's going to get released. He's going to release Amit, and he delivers a different message calling Mark a liar, And Mark admits he's unwell, and I do like the shots in Cairo, Egypt, but the council scenes go on a little too long. Layla meets Mark in Cairo as she takes him to her friend Anton Mogart, who is played by Gaspard Ulliel. I don't know if I said the name right, who did just die recently in a skiing accident. May he rest in peace. And he was a terrible Hannibal Lecter in Hannibal Rising, but here his performance is not the greatest, as I don't like Mark as a badass because he comes off like a jackass. Anton finds out Layla is with Mark, and Anton is offered treasure by Arthur, and it's a typical of this actor Gaspard Ulliel, forgive me if I said that wrong, to play a villain after Hannibal Rising. Mark gives the Moon Knight the body and fights all of Anton's men, and this action felt typical TV violence, with Steven taking over until Mark takes it back, which was so stupid to death. I can't stand the fact Mark and Steven are played by the same actor, which, like I brought up before, is very distracting, like I brought up before. Layla and Mark get a truck to get out of Cairo, and they stop somewhere to solve some riddle, as Steven comes out to solve it, as it's a star, and it becomes coordinates to a map, and they walk on the sands, and Steven changes into the Moon Knight to see the map of stars, which doesn't make much sense. Meanwhile, Arthur tells Emmett, she responds back, which is way too silly. Steven was knocked out at the end of the previous episode, and Layla drags him to someone who sees as they see his unconscious body, and finds Layla and shoots at her, and she gets the truck to blow up like fireworks, which was amusing in a dumb way. Steven doesn't want Mark to take over the body, nor Mark with Steven, as they get out of the truck and walk for miles to only find tents with something like weapons, as I can't explain this show's plot because it makes no sense. Steven and Layla go around a tomb where they find a room with dead bodies and other clues, and I am not an archaeologist, but the clues they find, I can't make sense of it. Hell, even the archaeologists wouldn't find this pile of crap believable because they can't make sense of this bull crap. Steven and Layla hides from some Egyptian creature that the mummy with Brendan Fraser looked better than this, because this creature looked bad. And as he squished it, and more crap comes along, and Layla gets briefly captured until she stabs another one and is almost killed by the creature, and Steven finds a mummy of Alexander the Great, which felt convenient, while he was picking up the skin off his arm to get his arm in his mouth, as Steven gets the thing that will save the world, as I can't make sense of this show. While Arthur confronts Layla and tells her to betray Mark, but luckily she didn't, which was, again, very convenient. Layla asks Mark about the death of her father and makes Steven turn into Mark, as Mark confesses as Layla runs away for now, and Arthur shows to monologue with Mark. And honestly, I fell asleep while watching this episode the first time because I was bored out of my freaking mind. Arthur shoots Mark, and the score for the moment was very distracting, as we watch something I believe is an old movie about Stephen Grant as a character in Mark's life, and we learn Mark has his own body living in a mental hospital. And I'm thinking, what the hell? While Arthur is a doctor at the mental hospital, and I don't know what the hell is happening at this point, as it's confusing and terribly written. Mark has a meltdown in front of Arthur and tries to escape the mental hospital as he hides in a room that happens to be Steven's, and they hug it out and try to escape as they're encountered by a hippopotamus that can talk. And I thought, what the hell is happening? And this is not supposed to be a cartoon. And it's going to irritate the hell out of me in the next episode because that hippo talking looked awful. We open with Mark's flashback, and we cut back to Mark in a chair talking with Arthur as he talks about sense or nonsense. And this show is a bunch of nonsense, and we go back to the damn hippo who can talk and is talking with Mark and Steven, and it's a female voice, as her name is Toraret, who was a goddess in Egypt, as they're in the underworld, as Mark doesn't believe it at first, but he opens the door to see for himself, and Taweret takes a measurement of their hearts to see if their hearts are full of unzipped baggage. And the perfect example of that would be Mark had a brother where he had a kid, where he had a little brother named Stephen, or as he was called, Roro, as he was killed by a giant cave with water, and his mother blames Mark for that for the rest of his life. And like I said, all of this is a bunch of nonsense. And going to the past was way too melodramatic. And we learn Mark did kill Layla's father while trying to kill himself, and Khonshu helps Mark out to become the Moon Knight, which is so sentimental. Stephen and Mark ask Taweret to get them back to life, while Mark doesn't want to go to the past and acts mental with the terrible overacting performance, and he goes back to freaking out with Dr. Arthur Harrow, and we see more of Mark's abusive mother, and that's when Mark created a split personality with Stephen in his mind, as Stephen lives life was a lie. And Stephen meets with Arthur, as he calls him Ned Flanders, which is a character from The Simpsons, which is owned by Disney, and learns his mother is dead. And Mark sort of shows up to the funeral, but doesn't go inside, which felt a little too much of the sentimental side. Stephen and Mark stop at the gate of Cyrus, and the dead rise up and get in the ship to kill them, as Stephen drives the ship while Mark is fighting them off, and Stephen saves his life and gets tossed to the sand, and Mark has no choice but to leave him behind, which is a terrible moment to end the episode before the last one. We pick up from Mark's death after Arthur shot him, as he heads the world by resurrecting Amit, and Layla lets Mark go in the water, and after he walks out, Arthur creates an army while he senses Layla is there, as she's about to kill Arthur, until Taweret tells her not to, as a message from Mark, and Arthur resurrects Amit, and the council suddenly realize it as they're idiots for not knowing this right away. Oh my god, this is so stupid. Amit is a crocodile while Khonshu is a bird, and this CGI looks like crap, TV delivers, as they must have been in a hurry to get this final episode out, as it looked incomplete. Khonshu asks Layla to be his avatar, and she says no, as he tries to explain how he could defeat Amit with an avatar, with Mark wants to get Stephen out of the sand, as he looks for him, finds him and resurrects him, and Khonshu fights Amit, which is a terrible CGI that fight is. Mark and Stephen dress up as the Moon Knights and negotiate with Khonshu as they get to fighting the evil, while Layla is having the split personality, which is a bunch of bull crap, because we never see her do so either earlier in the show. And Amit takes over the world by poisoning people, and Layla becomes a super being with wings, as Mark or the Moon Knight come in to fight Arthur, while Khonshu fights Amit. And this final action sequence is very cartoony, particularly with Layla and the Moon Knight versus Arthur and his people, which was very bad looking choreography, and the van scene was stupid as well. Mark and Layla almost get killed by some miracle. The bad guys get knocked down, which was such a convenient thing to do. And Arthur loses the fight and picks him up and to cast a spell on Arthur. And Khonshu wins, and Arthur is still alive. And Khonshu sets Mark, Stephen, and Layla free. And Mark goes back to Arthur's office as he's bleeding on the foot. And Stephen goes back to his home, and credits roll with mid-credits of Arthur in the mental hospital, and Khonshu getting Arthur in the limousine, and meets Jake Lockley, who's for the third person played by Oscar Isaac, as he shoots him dead, and the climax was a waste of time, as well as a miniseries to Marvel. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this show a 3.9 out of 10. I don't like the characters, as some are pathetic ones, and others just come off unlikable, as the plot makes no sense whatsoever. The two characters Oscar Isaac plays on screen, or three, based if you count that mid-credits thing on this show, as well as in the movies, is very distracting to the point it was confusing the crap out of me. And the effects in this show look terrible, as The Mummy with Brendan Fraser had better effects than this. That came out in 1999, whereas this felt rushed. The show is odd, weird. It didn't make me want to finish the rest of the show, but I stuck around because it's Marvel and it's a miniseries. But overall, I struggled to like it. There were a couple of things I found as I explained it, but overall, I can't make sense of this show. That's ridiculous. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and coming up next, I will be back with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And until then, Avengers Assemble!